life would be very easy. Life would be very easy if moral decisions only had consequences that you want. But that's just not the way life is. You know, in my city, when the telephone workers go out and strike, a senior citizen may die because he or she can't contact an ambulance. That's a moral consequence of a strike.
Yeah.
That's real. But then you have to weigh the consequences. Does that mean every civil worker has to give up the right to strike? I don't think so. And the same way...
I used to teach a bit of philosophy. That's a pretty strained analogy.
Why?
Because none of the moral, sociological, intellectual content is similar from one part of the analogy to the other.
No, the thing is, in moral decisions, there are always consequences which were unintended or undesirable.
Let's talk about morality and absolutes, because you criticize someone in particular, and I think you're right to, a historian who wrote that the Germans had a particular penchant or ability to hate and kill, and I actually reject that thesis.
And I've never heard anyone say that. Okay, now we're going to hear the Mississippi contrary argument.
No. Well, I don't know.
Okay, right, here we go.
The 14-foot alligator in the swamp is trying to eat your dog and your cat and your children.
I'm wondering that it seemed for a while in the 19th century and maybe early 20th, maybe throughout the 20th, that wage labor was going to be something that was going to be at the forefront of equalizing, and it turned out not to be the case.
For now.
For now, right, for now. And
I think that's one of the examples of discovered once, twice, three times, and it's still waiting for that time when it's...
Yeah, what I was wondering is are there parallels with some of these other movements? Because it seemed like such a big worldwide phenomenon, socialism.
I don't think it's over. I think the idea that just as you can't own a human being as property, the idea that somebody can own you for 8 hours in a day and control your life, I don't think that that will endure forever, assuming humanity survives. I don't believe it. I mean, I remember as a young man just being shocked because I was quite naive. I worked in a settlement house in Manhattan on 10th Avenue and 26th Street. It was called the Hudson Guild. Anybody know it? I worked with kids, and it was the Reagan era. And Reagan was coming to our settlement house because it had little black children, and he wanted to pretend to care. And our director invited him. I was kind of really appalled. Nobody in this room will remember except a few of the oldsters. Reagan, when he was president, there was a federal mandate in the United States that when you serve a meal to a kid in school, it had to have 2 vegetables. And Reagan wanted to get around that rule, so he said ketchup is a vegetable. In fact, as everybody knew, Reagan was a vegetable. Well, let's leave that aside. Ketchup is a vegetable. And I was just shocked. We had poor kids in our class. I taught an after-school program in a tough part of Chelsea, the projects in 10th Avenue. And you're inviting this guy who campaigned on ketchup is a vegetable? And so I wanted to wear a button registering my support. No, it was not even a contract, just in the election, because he came just for electioneering. It was 84. Just wearing, and he said, you can't wear a button. I said, what? 1 second. What about my First Amendment right and blah, blah, blah? No, you don't have any First Amendment rights. You have only one right here, the right to work or get fired. You have no other rights. I was really very surprised. What do you mean, I don't have any rights? Yeah, he bought your time. And when he buys your time, Your time is his time, and he has the right to tell you what you can and can't do. I was really kind of surprised. Now, I don't believe that will go on through eternity, notions like that you are somebody else's property for 8 hours, which is why Marx called it wage slavery. They pay you a wage and then you become their slave. No, I don't think that will last through eternity. I think there'll come a time when that principle will be rejected. But it hasn't happened yet. How it'll happen, I have no idea. And whether it will happen in time, before our planet is engulfed by climate change, I know it's a possibility. Or Trump will go to war with China. So, I don't know. But as a principle, I think it can't withstand logic and reason. I don't see how it can. Like eating the dog. Yeah. These things, there's just going to come a time when people are going to look back and think this is so weird that people believe things like that. Just like we look back and we think how barbaric cannibalism is, how barbaric child sacrifice is, people will look back at us and think how barbaric so many of the things we do are. Anyone else? Yes,
Just
Bob.
a question.
And then Cecilia, go ahead.
In between sexual equality and sentient equality, shouldn't there be racial and tribal equality? Because that's very powerful now, and it looks like it's going to be powerful long after I'm gone. So,
I think the idea of tribal equality, if you say tribal, it's human equality, and I think that proposition has won out at some level. It's also, there have been regressions there, and we have to be honest about that. It's not been perfect, but as a general principle, the idea of the equality of humankind has held up pretty well, I think. But not perfect, imperfect. Cecilia?
Yeah, I'm going to play the devil's advocate. If animals have the same right like humans.
Not the same
no,
rights, the
but,
right to life.
The right to life, okay? Within that struggle for equality, we had people like DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act. People had all these feelings about it, all the way to the Supreme Court. Now it's the law of the land. Would we then have, how do you call it, DOBA? A defense of beasts, or animals? How far? How far?
I don't know.
Because if you look for equality, then what's afforded to one should be afforded to the other.
It raises different issues, We're not going to ever reach the point where we have to make decisions about the right of 2 male dogs to marry. It's not exactly the same. It's not. It's not exactly the same.
No.
And I don't know how it's going to be. You're asking basically, how is it going to be legislatively enacted?
Exactly.
It's funny because things happen. I lived through turbulent, tempestuous times where the world was turned upside down in my lifetime. Very dramatic changes. And things which seemed so ridiculous at one time, most of you know the big examples, women's equality, gay rights, and so forth, but even little things. I remember in the 1970s, the early 70s, I had a friend. She was the salt of the earth, the most wonderful person, so good, so kind, and then she should be acknowledged to the 1 billion people in China, Kathy Jarvis. And she had a dog, and dogs used to defecate in the street. And then people started talking about you should pick up after your dog. And she was like, that's just ridiculous. What do you mean pick up after your dog? Now, she was the most wonderful person, the leftist, but it seemed like such a insane idea, pick up after your dog. Well, we're now 50 or so years later, and nobody would even think twice. Of course, if your dog is shitting on the floor, you better fucking pick it up. You know, it's like, that's pretty clear. And what kind of amazes me, not only that she was such a good person but couldn't understand that idea, what really amazes me is how human beings internalize these norms. What do I mean by that? Well, when they first had what was called the pooper scooper law, when they first had it, people would, you know, when the cameras weren't watching, they'd leave it there, right? Now you'll see in the dead of night, there are no cameras, there's nothing. But people will still pick up. They've completely internalized the norm. It's just second nature now. You don't look, is anyone watching, and then you leave it there? No, you don't really care. It's become a reflex. So the idea of... Maybe, I don't know. So, what?
When it snows and rains.
Oh, yeah.
You
see everything.
Because what?
Okay.
I'm listening to the rationalizations. Okay. But so people can change so significantly and internalize norms, which in another era would seem totally crazy. So I'm not so skeptical about these possibilities. How it will happen, I don't know. But I'm pretty confident it will happen. But I can't tell you the legislative route, you know, whether Chuck Schumer will have a filibuster.